we did send out an announcement. You may be aware that Sarah Young, who has served in this capacity since the beginning of it even being a position, has moved on to now work on some special projects in the agency to be kind of our Kickstarter person who's going to get launch projects where we sometimes have trouble at the very beginning, and she has proven time and time again that she's excellent at that. So she's actually no longer part of teaching and learning, and so we miss her, but she's here with us today, and we're really excited about Todd taking on that position and that challenge as we go forward. Also wanted to give just a minute to Shannon, who has an announcement for you.
Sure. There is a flyer in your folder. Looks like this. It says TNTP at the top. So this is just a professional learning opportunity that we are inviting you to. The math team, myself, Jolie, and Nathan, we were able to hear a presentation from this organization at a national conference we went to, and we were so impressed by it, we wanted to bring it here. So it's Thursday, March 14th, from 12 to 4 in the afternoon, and we have a presenter coming to share about a report from this nonprofit organization called the New Teacher Project, and it's really about students having access to grade level work, and how it goes through kind of some stories of students who thought they were being prepared for college, they thought they were being prepared for things, and then they found out actually they were being given below grade level assignments and things like that. So it'll be really engaging. Like the first part will be looking at the study, and then the second part will be going through some guidebooks specifically for LEA and state level leaders. So we would invite you to come. Any questions on that? Thank you.
Now, every time we have a curriculum directors meeting, I always try to get feedback on how things went and what you really like and what you need more of and what you don't want anymore. And every time, I always hear from people that what you value most is the opportunity to get to know and hear from other curriculum directors. And that's always the number one thing that comes out. I always think we have wonderful information for you. You don't want that. What you want is each other. And so John and I put our heads together. We decided that we would do something I normally don't do, which is a kind of an icebreaker activity for you to get a chance to get up and to get to know other people who are in the room, because we don't normally do that. So in your packet, you will find a sheet that looks like this. And I will ask you in a minute to get up and go around, and we did kind of a New Year's theme. So to find out somebody who has the same resolution that you have, or to find somebody who you've never spoken with before and find out what their resolution is. So it's really just a chance for you to get up and to meet some people, and I, of all people, didn't bring a pen. Hopefully you have a pen, and you can just mark on there the names of the people that you met. Use this as a chance to USBE. Please mingle with the curriculum directors and get to know them. Curriculum directors mingle with USBE and mingle with each other as well. So we will take about, let's give ourselves, John, we'll take about maybe 10 minutes to do this. Okay? So at about quarter after, we'll stop. Thank you, Sam. So start with the people at your table, but then get up, move around, get to know some people. I think we've met.
You're in a chat. You're in I'm sure yeah, people have
Jared?
I want to spend more time with my kids.
Oh, that's really good. That's different than mine, but you just yeah, I'm very on and on. Same word, that's exactly
Is
right.
anything like Headspace?
And then I let him laugh.
Not kill yourself.
I listen to this. and get input.
Thanks for coming.
It's kind of funny though. Sit down and talk. 2019 is actually 10 days. All kinds of numerical things. First 17 scratch numbers is 2019. Like there's things like that. I love that. It'll be a great year. That's the whole year. How about you guys? How are you learning? Are you taking lessons?
I have an app and YouTube. An app called Musician.
You and I have the same resolution.
Listen to you play. It's like a video game and almost tells you right.
He does. How about you, Sam?
Working on it for 5
So I'm supposed to practice 4 days a week. That's my goal. I practice and do that.
All right, Jared.
I'm trying to get our office to do half marathons. I need to be. All right, I think we only have 10 minutes.
A little anxious, but
Personal resolution. Maybe that's pretty counts because it doesn't
participated, didn't retain, but that's okay.
Stick with training the puppy.
Like I'm looking around like, hey, US. Said you're gonna.
Have you already shared the talk as well?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, sadly, I'm missing not a huge resolution. I'm like, so the big my birth did not. That's how we were the same. But I guess I'm like, no, I'm going to think about
So last year I gave up my the whole year. And now it's really
is yours right?
there's something I'm excited about. Is it Sylvester Chapter? Yes. Oh, love so actually it's a technology-based decision. So I have what I've that tracks my finances and so you know they have that budget section and it's like how much do you think you want to spend in these areas in the grocery store, like coffee, and so I would get notifications that was like and they were coming sooner in the month and so I was like oh yeah, oh my gosh and then I just kept getting them. And I was like, I'm sorry.
So what would you have?
Now, granted, it counts like if you're in Constance, like whatever. If you buy a bagel, it all counts, you know, or whatever. But I literally was like, I have a card payment for coffee each week. So you're off. So my resolution this year is that I can just have it on the weekend. Because I did. I needed to kind of like draw that and like, okay. Anyway, that is my resolution. Yeah, so I quit over Christmas break last year, which was a good thing because I know we should have done better. Because I oh my gosh, this is after 10 days, I had this like, whoa, you're ready to go. I'm here. But yeah, no, I celebrated the new year with coffee. No, I'm not clean anymore, but that's
Although if you watch it,
I'm hearing her like, this is crazy.
I used to,
I know Chris and Orange because this whole life is all of my taste.
she was like, what's wrong with you?
I
I know, I was like, I'm living vicariously through your Starbucks.
Congratulations. I'm super into
Thank you.
radio.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Oh, mine is I'm retiring
Like,
The challenge is not like detail.
well, typically, honestly, there were things that went well with and the idea here is that it's like rather than not always everybody's just right, something you want to.
Don't start
Elements sound great if you're justifying money. You know, and we don't know that. Don't make the mistakes we did.
Still trying to get all the districts to accept that.
So tell me this. Yeah.
It's gonna be a great email all of them.
Yeah. So
Living on the
As soon as they accept it, they'll
and not even reservations. Like, I have a book. That's not.
Oh, there you go.
I've been
I noticed that everybody.
And I don't want them if they got to
not happy.
So, and you are.
So,
in person or do you do audible?
oh yeah.
I'll talk to them about it again. I'll meet with a bunch of them.
I'll start kind of pushing that way.
There's Washington and
I was asking the guy. I like having the book. But if the teacher wants to use reading, then I know it's like, well, we'll let him.
Yeah, a lot of teachers in there use the big teachers accounts, and they all really want to use it. So I've been like pressuring them.
I was kind of giving it to
Used to be Washington.
yeah, it was hard.
People do shit.
So it made no sense. I was actually kind of surprised.
They kind of like to do their own things.
That was always my question.
It's weird. So he took.
Are we talking about this or is this a like exactly? Or is it a like exactly? What kind of accountability?
Yeah, he does a lot. I got those BYU courses in there too.
You don't want to like where everyone's like chatting. You're like,
There's 100.
yes, I agree.
You just, you know what? I've been.
He's done to their board meetings. Yes.
No.
Open it up.
I just put other things.
Out of the chapter you're supposed to read.
You put that close
Really, like,
slideshow in
everyone's
any presentation. So we're going to see. It's not baseball.
If you turn the page.
They actually, the funny is, they put it on.
Yeah, like you did. Make it till you make it. My part.
Can't stop when. It's like $2,500.
There must be something. There must be
System compatibilities that they're worried about. Bring pieces. They want to That's the only thing.
I was gonna say monthly. Okay. But like beautiful coloring. That's why I asked. I was like, so like, do you see this stuff? That's like a background.
Yeah, anytime.
Good, really good. Yeah. Your responsibilities, I was talking to Sarah.
Like, I think my personal opinion, they expedited kids, right? Like, I've gone through a puppy and then with my child, and I was like, my child, this is a lot longer. I felt like with the puppy, I was like, all right, 2 years, here we go. 2 years, I can do it. Yeah, versus like, it's like, 2 years, look at you, you're still not self-sufficient. Everybody wants to know.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that'll be. Specific to the details.
I never spoken to. I'm Sandy Shepherd. Where are you from? Oh, good, great,
But
good.
I'm scholar
Charter. Yeah. So tell me what you're in. Professional.
We had never had one.
That's weird.
We love it.
Yeah.
I was like,
Oh, so what do they have in you? What do you do?
but that they
Is that what you're doing?
now we're paying for
So you're busy.
Yeah. And eventually,
A lot of played for a while. To do that, oh, that's good. I can see there. I'm with Academic West. Yeah, that's good. So what are you guys curriculum-wise? What do you? I'm just adding things. What curriculum are you using? Like your 8th grade study science.
And like bring them up back all together. Take them and just like fling them.
That's what we do. We're just using. We do
Like,
so we
like
do
run and bring them back. Like all together.
other gals in their piloting the bush refugee. There's 3 refugees and there's 3
Because otherwise,
so they're basically the public. I'm looking to grade. I want something.
Yeah, it didn't fail. We kind of know what
That's pretty awesome.
you expect to go to be like, I'm back because you're a rock star, you know? Yeah, it is interesting.
someone in the same room, they'd be like, such a design.
Because what my teachers said, they have to use writing. So I'm looking for things. Ours is
Change your mind. Priority. It really does.
Anyway, I'm looking to. Nice to meet you. Mine is to open the 8th grade and be successful. Building it last year, but now the curriculum and actually my staffing is amazing. I got 3 of them just taking half day this year and still going full day next year. So I've already staffed, which is unusual. They're usually
He's I was going to reach out to him my first day. After he left, he and I talked prior to him leaving. And always his goal, well, at least his next is that IT director. So we had talked last year about he'll be good. And last I talked to him, he said it was already a challenge. Some problems that needed to be solved. So it was pretty cool. But we've got such a cool team there as well. Justin Anderson, Justin even after I left, but I Katie and Kelly. We've just got a strong team. And brought those guys in as specialists in our class. They're not experts. And so we've got them. We've got a good team to see. Technology. Yeah. Yes, we have each of those specialists on teams, and so they're bringing technology and support side.
And so she's very thoughtful. What do we want to call our parents, like for grandparents? And I was like, she's like, but like, you're like, and I was like, oh, it's true, I could. Being respectful.
The last few times. Much allow the She's been the technical difficulties test a couple times. Yes, there have.
It's just part of it.
The organization we had a conversation. Michelle Shibman is our coach of coaches. She is, and she's done a really good job collaborating with Angie, who's our coach of coaches for them training together. So not only have we had coach, we've combined all of them
Done enough webinars.
in 3-4 this year. So we'll have 4 combined trainings.
So you're like the instructor, like,
We've got some ideas.
so like, you always have my camera on, but then I have to security. As opposed to like, not eating, and like, because it was in the evening, right? And so anyway, but I did.
I don't know about you, but I learned about 3 really cool things happening in the state that I wasn't aware of just by finding out what people are working on this year. So I hope that you had an opportunity to do the same, and that maybe you had, now some ideas to think, well, if I want to see how, what it's like to open a new school, I'm going to talk to Sandy, because she's done it several times. So, as you have those conversations, hopefully that was helpful to you. I wanted to take a minute today and talk just about upcoming legislation and what we're anticipating coming this year. Right now, really all that's available on the legislative site is bill file names. So there are some bill file names that we're kind of wondering, ooh, what's that one about? And we just don't know until we start to see some language associated with some of the bills. But our specialists are often involved in some of the early thinking about these bills. And so I wanted to just take a few minutes today and talk about some of the things that we know that where we've seen some of the language that's associated with the bills and where we really do have some anticipated things that could be happening. So let's see, we put Jennifer Johnson's slides first and she's not here yet, so she's doing another thing. So we'll just skip around. I can do that one. The Carol Moss one that you got up there. So one of the things that Representative Moss has been interested in a number of years is this idea about why are people leaving the profession. And so she has proposed a survey that would be required of everybody upon exit that would collect some data. What that data is would be yet to be defined, but the idea would be that we need to find out why there's so much movement among the profession. I'm sure it's no surprise to you that a number of people, even people outside of education, are very concerned about the teacher shortage, about teacher retention, about teacher satisfaction. All of those things really weigh into how we're treating our most precious commodity, which is our children. And so Representative Moss, who is a former teacher, in fact, she was my teacher when I was in high school, is really concerned about this. And so she has proposed that there would be an exit survey every year that would be handled when people, again, when they left when they left their positions. What else have we got there, John? Teach Bill, I can talk about that one too. The Teach Bill teaching initiative has been around for a long time, and it's been a loan program. There have been two elements to it. There's a higher ed piece where the colleges of education can give loans to juniors and seniors to help them finish out as they're teaching. And then there's been a high school piece that you might be aware of too, that where our office has collected the applications for that, which is more of a four-year scholarship, or not scholarship, a loan. The terms of that loan were that if the loan would be forgiven after you completed, I believe it was 4 years, I think it was like PJEP, years of teaching, and then the loan would be forgiven. The handling of that loan part of it happens up at USHE, and they have been really bogged down in collecting from people who didn't make out their 4 years, people who left the state, all kinds of different things. It becomes running a loan program is really not the business of education. That's really the business of banks. And so, and because something being a loan is sometimes actually a disincentive, like somebody might say, well, I don't know if I'm going to be around for 4 years, and I don't want to take out a loan that I don't know what the future is. And so, Representative Snow has worked quite a bit with Greg
Benson. Greg Benson.
Benson, thank you. All I could think of was Hughes, and I knew that was wrong. Greg Benson over at USHE, and to rewrite the THBEL program as a scholarship program. This scholarship program would be all in the hands of USHE. It would end the piece for the high school students, but it would let the institutions actually give scholarships to freshmen if they wanted to. It would be up to them then how they would do those scholarships, but it would take out all of that repayment stuff that just isn't really very effective anyway. And we found that with the PJEP program too. We're really trying to move away from those loan types of programs. This one I'm kind of excited about, even though it eliminates the high school reward or award, because I do think by it being a scholarship, it'll be more interesting to people. And we have to assume that people applying for the scholarship actually do want to be teachers. I mean, the scholarship is to study to be a teacher, and then the universities would be able to say, oh yeah, they're on track to becoming a teacher. So this is one to keep an eye on, even though it's a higher ed bill. It's one that impacts our profession in a really profound way. And so I think that one's exciting too. Okay, what else have we got? Digital teaching and learning. We are going to let Sarah talk about this one.
So we just have a couple of items that we're aware of in our section. The first one is the competency-based education acceptance by higher education. So just so you know, that's already in code. It states that all of our higher ed institutions must accept a high school transcript that is demonstrated through competency-based education, as opposed to a traditional credit-bearing or 4.0 grade scale. So that piece is already present. However, we have still run into some issues, and we're hearing more from the field as we see more LEAs starting to look towards this model or a model of standards-based grading or something similar, that it's still a barrier when it comes to scholarship qualifications. So that there are a lot of scholarships where it says, you know, you may be able to get into the school, but to qualify for a scholarship, you need to be in a certain percentile of your class, or you need to have a certain GPA on a 4.0 scale, which clearly in the realm of competency, that's just not going to translate in a one-to-one fashion. So this is being drafted by Senator Milner and is something where they're just seeking to require the Utah in-state institutions to have more equitable opportunities, so that that's not a barrier to LEAs and or students and families who are looking to continue into higher ed. The second one is the Learn platform. So this is something that we use in digital teaching and learning for monitoring. Some of you may or may not be familiar with it, but it's a useful tool in regards to having transparency into the different educational technology apps that students and teachers are using, as well as having the opportunity to run more localized data sets in regards to, if I'm using this application, am I seeing impacts from that usage? And if not, maybe I shouldn't continue to buy it. So from that regard, we are seeking an ongoing funding request. We've continued to receive one-time funding for this, but it is part of the Utah State Board of Education ask for this year. The last component that we'll touch on is the Upstart amendments. So many of you are familiar with the Upstart program. If you're not, it is a free home-based preschool opportunity that's available for parents to be able to work with 4-year-olds at an at-home setting to get some foundational experiences in math, as well as literacy, science, and some social emotional opportunities. It is meant to be a blended learning experience, so not just sitting your 4-year-old in front of the computer and walking away, but instead to really be that collaborative learning to also help parents, you know, in regards to providing educational supports and opportunities for their kids. This program is wildly popular. We currently have over 14,000 4-year-olds across the state of Utah participating in it this year alone, and the wait list extends beyond that. So in regards to this program, it does have a requirement that 30% of the students being served have to meet certain criteria in regards to the family financial need. As part of that, many of you may or may not have heard from families that it's like, I tried to get my child into Upstart, but I was put on a wait list and ultimately not selected. The financial piece is a bit of a challenge for us as an agency, because right now it's self-reported, which the auditors have let us know, like, just really doesn't meet the bill in terms of accountability. And yet moving towards asking families to provide some sort of documentation in regards to W-2s or reporting out in regards to their finances is something where our agency has always shied away from that, because we're concerned about the impacts that could have on some of our populations who don't want to be providing additional documentation in the current climate. And so with that balance being a little dicey, the Upstart amendments is really looking to address income qualifications and verification by shifting that population in regards to not having it defined at a family income level, but instead based on students living in the boundaries of schools that would be considered Title I qualifying, or necessarily existing small schools, as well as IGP is defined by the Department of Workforce Services. So really just looking at it by saying if your address falls within this boundary, you would be considered a high needs population associated with meeting that 30%. This program will continue. Just so you know, we are in RFP right now for a provider. We hope to have that wrapped up here within the next like 6 to 8 weeks. And the registration is already open for cohort to start in fall of 2019. So any questions about any of those three?
Does that affect anything that's already happening?
So everything will continue to happen as it's happening. It's more along the lines of future cohorts in regards to being able to extend qualifications without moving towards you have to provide financial data. So
I've got some people in my house that think that Upstart is no longer funded. The program's gone. Da 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 da.
interesting.
And I'm thinking, I'm not hearing that, but.
So okay, you're the second person who's had that conversation with me this week. So just to clarify, Upstart as provided by the state is on ongoing continued funding. Now, there was an opportunity through Waterford where they procured a federal grant through I-3 to be able to do expanded services in rural areas. So that was an over and above where they were actually paying in certain spaces for an Upstart coordinator in those rural spaces. The continuance of that grant is something where I have to defer to Waterford in regards to what that looks like in transition. But the state program is ongoing funding being maintained, and they actually received additional funding last legislative session. So it's not something we see going away.
Well, I'm rural, connected to Waterford, so I guess we'll have to find out.
Yeah, we can check in with them. Great. That's all we have for DTL.
Okay. Are all the rest of the slides the ones that Jennifer's supposed to do?
Same here.
Oh,
Hey.
Jennifer.
Good day.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Good morning.
Jennifer's doing double duties.
Got stuff going on. All right. Well, good morning. I have about 6 bills that I'm aware of for my team that we're going to go through. So the first one is the Intervention for Reading Difficulties grant. We did this one for the last 3.5 years. It's been a pilot project. We are taking out a pilot from model and expanding the opportunity. So this will be a grant opportunity for LEAs that want to enhance their tiered intervention process to improve those outcomes for reading difficulties in K through 5. So generally, we've had Cash, Provo, Tooele, Davis, and Fox Elder participate in this grant so far. And they tried out 3 different intervention products. We found 2 of the 3 worked very well. One of them we will not be recommending moving forward. The other 2, we saw some good results, especially with students who are in the 4th and 5th grade that we weren't as successful with before, and that we're on the training for special education, being able to avoid that with some real high quality interventions. So that'll be a competitive grant application, and it's been supported by the board as well as a committee bill that's coming out of the education committee, so it's likely to be funded. The next one is vision screening. So currently vision screening in schools is required. If you've ever done vision screening, it is a distance screening to see if kids can see things far away. We don't really do anything for near. So this is kind of an approach for reading to consider. There are vision impairments that prevent students from being able to read material up close. So things like the black and white, some tracking issues, as well as kind of shakiness. Most teachers have no ability to screen for these things or know even what to look for. And so this will help to identify students at risk for reading difficulties due to vision impairments and give some supports and financial strategies for helping them to get the vision therapy they may require. So for the schools, it'll mean increased vision screening for students who are demonstrating either at risk for going into special education, so there might be a referral process happening, or students that are below or well below benchmark on DIBELS in grades 1 through 3 to kind of approach this early for intervention to help them to avoid having reading difficulties in the future. So money right now hasn't really been talked about yet, and then Senator Escamilla is the sponsor on that bill. We are still in draft mode, but the draft should be out, we meet again this week, so it should be out next week for your review. It will increase the load on your nurses in terms of the screening that they might have to go through. Teachers will be responsible, most likely, for filling out a checklist of what they're noticing about that student, specifically related to vision. Do they hold the book close? Do they have a hard time? That's kind of a quick checklist. And if the student meets a particular threshold, then they would go on to a higher level of screening. So everybody gets the distance screening, but students who either fail that or are demonstrating reading difficulty classroom would then get an additional layer of screening that then would lead to kind of a tiered. So the next one, early childhood coordination amendments. So this particular one is trying to get kind of a governor's commission to lead the work around early childhood. If you are in this space at all, you know it is the most kind of disconnected, lack of collaboration group that there is in the state that I at least work with. Lots of services being provided, but lack of coordination across those services. So this is meant to kind of build this commission to really coordinate the services offered by many agencies in the state. There will be potentially a cabinet level executive director of early childhood that will be under the governor's house in terms of having someone actually over early childhood. The governor has in his 10-year plan this thing around early childhood, yet there's no one in the governor's office who actually leads that. And help with that, it would also codify the early childhood Utah group that currently has responsibilities, but there's no real accountability for them. So there would be some increased accountability for that. Representative Cutler was the sponsor. He is no longer in the House, and so there will be a replacement for early childhood amendments. So currently, we've had high quality school readiness expansion for programs that have been deemed high quality to provide additional seats for students in preschool. This particular grant is up this year with TANF funding, and so no longer is there TANF funding available to continue that. So we're going to give $2 towards preschool expansion. As we went to look at this, Upstart is up for amendment as well. And then we just did House Bill 380 last session, which is the high quality school readiness, trying to get people to quality as well as to pay for success grants. So what we're actually doing is bringing all of those bills together into one kind of compendium bill for early childhood to try and coordinate the bills that go around preschool education. So it'll be one pretty significantly large bill. I'm trying to fine tune HB 380 from last session, as well as updating Upstart to really focus on low income English learners and some of the other populations that we know could benefit most. But this will hopefully be able to extend expansion funding that's no longer going to be available after this year. So if you are in the high quality school readiness expansion grant, that grant is up this year. There will not be any more funds if this particular our goal is to have the 11 million that we were getting from TANF. 2 million of that has been going to PWS, 9 million has been going for Upstart, as well as 7 million for the preschool programs in the public setting. So we're going to continue that. That's a big ask if you consider $11 for a state that has not really done any state funded programming. So we'll see how that goes. But that is the hope at this point. Senator Milner has made this one of her priority bills, so it is high ranking for that. She's also on resolutions and things, so she'll have a little ability to support. And then it was supposed to be Representative Last, but I saw yesterday it might be Representative Snell. So one of those two will be the sponsor, co-sponsor. I think this is my last one. Here it is back. Dual language immersion. Oh, there's two more. One more. Dual language immersion amendments. So last year we had the dual language immersion bill go through because it's in pilot form for like 10 years. So it's time to take it out of pilot. In the way that it's written currently, it allows for different models for dual language immersion, not just a 50-50 model. The amendment would go back to just 50-50 being the model allowed for support and financial support in that. And it would add grade 9 to the assessment requirement. Currently it's grades 3 through 8. 9 is kind of that part where some kids are taking AP, some kids are taking Apple, or not taking Apple, but we don't have any assessment data. So it would put 9th graders into the assessment data pot. Money-wise, no expected change, and Representative Hutchins is running this one. Last one, dual language as well. This is an online language pilot, so Senator Andrick wanted to be able to help students who are interested in dual language immersion, but for the lottery reasons or just due to demand, weren't able to get into dual language immersion in the younger years where it's more accessible. So for students that are maybe in grades 3, 4, or 5 that want to enter dual immersion, their spots now, if we had students kind of learning online while they're not in the school program, potentially maybe they could have access to dual language immersion later years than what is normal. So that is kind of the intention of this, is to see if we get this, and I think the target language will be Chinese. There is his daughter is in 5th grade and he wants her to get into dual language immersion. There's a little political, personal pieces in there, but to see if they can prepare for later entry into the program. So this would be a small pilot. I anticipate like 3 schools to participate in the program and then just kind of see if it actually works. So we will see how it goes. Very passionate about it. So. Those are my 6 questions. Are we taking questions?
Yes, take questions.
Okay. Any questions about those? Lovely. Blasted you with some.
Any opinions, concerns, any, like.
Yeah, a lot of these are still in draft form. So if you have
Still
thoughts,
opportunities.
and I'm helping them drafting most of them, so I can have it. No concerns about it.
Just a clarifying question with this particular one that's up on the screen. You said just probably three schools, just a small.
Actually, just to start like piloting it, and so his child is in Alpine, so Alpine will be from Alpine.
Well, if Alpine is, then we want it too.
All right, I'll let him know. I mean, we do have spots that open up later. If it worked, it wouldn't be a bad way in, because we have so many students who don't get to participate in dual language just due to that. Everybody gets in for 2nd grade, but then we start losing kids by 4 or 5, but we don't have kids to replace this. Not a bad idea. It's just a little different. Very satisfied with all of that. All right, well, thank you. If you do have questions, feel free to reach out. Preschool bill is still in draft. It should be out. I don't expect until probably the week of session. It is a priority bill, so it'll be one of those that has a higher, a lower number, which is always good. The education one for the preschool commission, that one's already drafted, been through committee. It's in the economic development group because again, preschool is a hot mess, and sometimes it's in state and sometimes it's in general funds, so.
We have an online question. If we're adding ninth grade assessments for dual immersion, will the funding for the assessment be the responsibility of the district?
No, so we would get additional funding. I know the slide says no funds in terms of growing the program, but we would need additional funding to pay for ninth grade assessments. So it would be paid for by the state. Robert?
Just as social studies plug, if there's any of these bills seem particularly interesting or relevant to young people, like 7th graders, who could then track the legislation, that would be great. Because sometimes if you've got laws that actually affect school and kids can see that policy has an impact on their lives, that's a great way to teach civics. So consider that. Consider recommending that to your teachers.
I'm out.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, concurrent enrollment, I think.
It is not in draft. I thought the message was too. It's not, it's, there's a discussion that there's going to be concurrent enrollment, but the text is not even in draft. So we can next month.
So there is one of the things we wanted to do today is to tell you things that we actually knew something about. And so everything that you've heard so far is, we have seen some draft legislation or we've been involved in the conversations. We know that those are reality. There's also a whole list of about, I don't know, like 50 more, I think, that are just like, they're just titles. And we don't really know what they're about, although we've heard rumors on some. And so we thought we would know more. There is one that has a title of concurrent enrollment. So something's happening in concurrent enrollment. We don't know what. So we're not going to talk about that today. Or the other 49 education kind of titles. But when we meet again in February, we'll know a lot more about what's happening at that time. And then we can update you on the bills that are happening. As always, it's really great for you to follow the legislation either from our website, which always on the homepage. There's information about the legislature as it comes out. So you can just go there, or you can just go right directly to the legislative homepage and follow bills. There's tracking tools that you can use. You can just kind of go and see what's happening. A thing that's really important for you to know is that even though we are often involved in the original drafting of the legislation, or they ask us, or they ask our board members, for opinions about different things, when it comes down to now there's a bill and it's in committee or it's on the floor and people have to vote on it, your influence is critical at that point. So every year we have bills we really want, and we have bills that we think, oh dear, we hope that never gets through. And for legislators who might not be as involved in the drafting of the bill, or maybe they're not on the education committee, but they still end up voting when it's time for the floor, your influence is critical, because at that point they kind of quit listening to us, because they're talking to us all the time, and we're just like, yeah, we're just the state employees, and they just dismiss us. But when they hear directly from teachers, principals, people in districts, that's what they really want to know, because they represent you. They don't, I have my own legislators like everybody else does, but they're representing your schools and your districts. And so I think something I never understood this when I was in a district, is how important your voice is. My voice was. I lost the opportunity to do that because I didn't realize what a big deal it was. So I just really want to encourage you to kind of keep tabs and keep watching. And I will say, and I'm probably talking mostly to the people that are online right now, if you're not on the Wasatch Front, where it's like, whoa, like, this place is crazy during the legislative session. I never would have dreamed it when I lived in St. George, what it's like up here. But you know what? It's not like that when you're in St. George or in Richfield or in Vernal. You have to try harder to pay attention, because the community is not as wrapped up, which I actually think is probably a good thing. But just for me to say, just really do take the time to connect. If you're wondering about something, if you see something like, okay, there's going to be a concurrent enrollment bill, so reach out to Nate, our early college specialist, and say, hey, what do you know about this? I mean, we are here for you too, and to help make those connections. So really take advantage of that during the legislative session. Any questions or any other things that you're concerned about that you maybe heard? Okay. Our next thing is the ACT Crosswalk Tool, and we are welcoming Megan Lopez and Whitney Barlow to talk to us about this.
I have Garrett pass these out, and they're extras. All right, good morning, and thanks for having me here. I am Megan Lopez. I am the secondary English Language Arts and WIDA assessment specialist in the accountability department for USDE. I'm actually here for Rebecca Peterson. Rebecca Peterson is in Provo and could not be here today, but she is the ACT assessment specialist, and so she asked me to present this really quickly to you, so I should be brief. Any questions that you do have regarding this tool and or any kind of test administration questions or concerns for ACT, please direct those to Rebecca, and her contact information will be on the last slide. But many of you have probably already heard about this tool that we are providing to LEAs and teachers, educators throughout Utah. And I do have a list. If you have any questions, I do have a list of LEAs that have actually already pre-ordered this tool. And those should be available pretty soon. But you can download this electronically as well, and I'll go through that. But what the assessment team did is basically the content specialist with Rebecca, so that includes myself for language arts, Whitney Barlow for math, and Scott Rostelli for science. We together, in partnership actually with the state of Tennessee and their Department of Education, we created a crosswalk tool to help inform teachers and inform them of instruction, and really starting at kindergarten of how to prepare students to do well on the ACT, and also what part of the Utah State Core can really prepare them. So, all right, so it's basically learning progressions across grades K through 12 that this provides. So in the copies that are here, you are welcome to keep that we handed out. And I apologize if there were not enough to bring it down to everyone. All right, and it's going to show the connections between the Utah Core Standards and the ACT expectations, okay? So when you actually flip to a certain area, any area, you'll see the ACT readiness standards. So the area that the ACT is going to be grading, and then how does that relate to Utah standards? And you will see that it's broken up. I believe it goes K through 5. Thank you. K through 5, 6 through 8, and then 9 through 12 for the different areas, grade levels. And so you can also see that what practices, what could this possibly look like in the classroom? And also, please note that this is not every single standard. And it's not, you must be doing these things in your classroom. These are just suggestions of things that you can do that are already in the core to help them prepare the students for the ACT. So the intent really truly is this is a tool for support for educators in the classroom to provide schools, LEAs, teachers with a starting point for just discussing and planning, right? How can we start? And I think one of the biggest things that we realized is this preparation truly starts in the elementary grades. If you look, you can see, hey, this is going to be on the ACT and assessed on the ACT, but this is something that students might be learning in first grade. But they still have to have that skill, and it might just be growing in sophistication throughout their years of schooling. So it's just how do I align my instruction across the grades? And so we really encourage LEAs to use this in teaming and planning So for schools and LEAs and teachers that did not have a chance to pre-order these, the ordered ones, they are going to be a little nicer than these, but you can download them. And this is where you can download them if you go to our assessment website. And if you click on assessments, so you would have to go to the right side when you're on the assessment website, and you'll see a little tab that says assessments. Click on that, and then there will be a tab of all the assessments for the state, and then you'll click on ACT, and this is where you will go. So if you get a copy of this, you can just directly click on it and it'll pull this up. So if you want to save some paper, you can just download and send it out digitally. So, and again, if you had a chance to look through, you'll see that these are the ACT readiness standards. How is that related to our Utah core standards? And it's broken into those grade spans. And then what could this possibly look like? But again, this is not the end all be all. These are just suggestions to get you started with planning. The areas that it does hit, we did this because, and we still don't know what exactly the state of writing is going to be with ACT. That's still going to be out in the future, but it's K through 12 for the subjects of English, reading, math, and it does have writing. So whether or not writing will be assessed along with the ACT in the future, let you know when we know. But we wanted to include writing because it is this year. Any questions about the writing? And if you have any questions, Rebecca's email is right here. If you have language arts questions, please reach out to me at any time. And then math, those questions would go to Whitney Barlow, and science, Scott Russ Kelly. So it was pretty quick and brief. Does anyone have any questions regarding this tool as support?
Just remind me, so if we wanted to know if our schools had reached out and pre-ordered.
I can read off the list really quickly if that would help. So I have Wasatch School District. I'm sorry for just yelling out your name if this is you, Kelly Booth. I'm not sure which LEA you are, but she has her own.
New Ames, I believe.
Huh? Okay. Dugway School, Grand County, Da Vinci Academy, Success Academy, Nebo District, Uinta District, Duchesne, Alpine, San Juan, North Star Academy, Ogden School District, Weaver School District, Rich School District, Garfield County, Tooele, North Summit, Juab, Ames is on here, Quest Academy, Beaver School District, Cache County School District, Utah Connections Academy, Academica West, Whitehorse High School, and South Summit. Those are the LEAs and or individual schools that have ordered right now. I'm not sure if and when another printing will be completed. You would have to reach out to Rebecca to find out. But if there's a demand, I don't see why we wouldn't print some more. But if you want to be paper conscious, you could always download it and just share it that way.
I was going to ask, since you gave us the link, could we have our district print shops print copies for teachers?
Absolutely.
Okay. If we need to. Okay.
Absolutely. Some people just, for a heads up, some LEAs requested that we bring them to our upcoming Utah Aspire Plus and RISE trainings. So if you did request that, we will have them. I think for those trainings that are in a couple of weeks, we'll have them available for you to pick up either in Ogden or Richfield as well. But yes, absolutely. Questions concerning the Crosswalk Tool?
So, before you go, I think it would be great to hear from some of you about how do you plan to use this tool? You know, maybe you could share some ideas right now about what will you do to use the tool.
we were just talking, we're from the same district. We have our curriculum maps, and initial thought was to highlight in our curriculum maps the standards that you have here in the crosswalk, and then work with our achievement coaches just to bring attention for our younger grades, K5. It'd be highlighted, so that would be the asterisk, this is what it means. And then our achievement coaches could just work on that with PLCs, just in discussions, just bringing it into what they're already planning. That was an initial thought we had.
And I would also really encourage, because we see with educators thinking of the ACTs given in 11th grade, let's let those 11th grade teachers prepare them. But I think this document really goes to show that preparation can start right away. So we can hand this to our K through 6 educators. How can we support and vertically team and vertically support, right? So I do have this copy. If trying to get their hand on it right now. No,
We'll take it.
okay.
Hey, I want to ask you a more challenging question then.
Yes.
Not you, these guys.
Oh, okay.
You stay.
I'm staying. I'm here.
You can help answer these questions. When the state was thinking of going in the direction of ACT at the high school level, all of us were very concerned about, well, does that mean that what we're going to do is we're going to teach to the ACT instead of the standards? So I'm going to reframe my question that I just asked about how are you going to use this tool. So how are you going to ensure that what we're actually teaching is the standards and not the ACT test? Okay. Now you have a tool, but that's to me, that's the fundamental question, because performance on the ACT is really important. And we have a crosswalk that now shows us how that can happen, but how do we ensure that we're actually teaching the standards?
I'll talk
You
again.
can start, but I want to hear from somebody else
Okay,
too.
I can pause. I started with PLCs. I mean, within our schools, what our teachers should be doing is they should be constantly looking at a curriculum map or the standards, if they have just the standards, and working through the professional learning communities to discuss what they're going to teach, how they're going to teach it, and then creating their common formative assessments. I mean, our PLCs is where our teachers should be getting together to collaborate, and then our principals or administrators and our achievement coaches, if you have instructional coaches, should be there to support those teachers in hitting those standards with the good instruction in the classroom. I mean, that's basic, quick answer, but that's where I would start with.
Yeah. I truly believe the state office just needs to integrate it into they have enough to do with the core. I'm just telling you. So to integrate a crosswalk for an ACT, if you're telling us don't teach to the test, a lot of teachers are going to look at that and try to integrate it. Just think it needs to be integrated into the state core, and we hit both of them at the same time. I think it's problematic for teachers. I think consistently we've already instituted our PLCs to have the core in place, and then to give them this and say, but we also want these kids passing this test, so we're going to add this crosswalk. I just think it needs to be integrated. My input.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm concerned, like you, in asking your question, that the opposite will happen. That the emphasis will be on ACT. Collectively determined, it will be up to the side. What is taught, what is tested is what is taught. Thank you.
Yeah, I also think that if the focus is the standards and the PLC conversation is talking about grade level standards, then you learn to become flexible and your content knowledge is greater. And oh, the camera came right here. That is what is important, because I think one of the things that scares me a little bit is if we start thinking about teaching to the test or looking at this, like when you look at the crosswalk, teaching to the test means that you're teaching middle school and sometimes elementary standards. And my concern is that if we think that teaching to the ACT is
test taking strategies and the content that is there, that our students are not going to be ready for college, and we may actually see a decrease in scores as opposed to the goal, which is an increase in scores.
Which I think brings us back to what Megan said, which is ACT preparation doesn't begin in 11th grade. Because 11th grade content is beyond the ACT. ACT prep actually begins in elementary school because that's what's on the ACT. So to give this tool to your 10th grade teachers, even your 9th grade teachers, it's kind of too late.
I would say also there can be a lot said for how it is introduced to your that they can see, hey, if you are teaching the standards, you are hitting these things that will be assessed on the ACT. Nothing can, that core, those standards, if you're teaching the standards, your students are going to do well. But if you have interest in knowing, hey, which standards, if I'm noticing my students are scoring lower in the science portion of the ACT, what standards can I start to focus on a little more to help if they need a little extra support? But that by no means that I need to stop teaching the standards. So maybe our approach needs to be, you're already teaching the core. In your PLCs, you are core focused, you know? Look at how much you are actually already preparing the students. Is there something more in our core that we can do to better support them on the ACT? Didn't consider this is what it might actually look like in my classroom, and I can just tweak it a little, right? To better support them, and hopefully that could. Sometimes it might just require a subtle mindset shift, right? In order to take a tool like this to say, don't teach to the test, teach the core, and see how the core is going to prepare for that test.
Yeah, and I like that because the conversations a few years ago said, we have this assessment system that has standards, we have curriculum, we have tests, it's all aligned. And now we have a summative test in the 11th grade called ACT that's not aligned to anything. And that defies all the rules of assessment. In many ways, this then debunks that says, no, it is aligned. The state core is aligned with ACT expectations. And truthfully, I'm not changing a thing. There might be a few tweaks, but we're not changing a thing. We're teaching the core, we're testing the core, and that should, oh, by the way, help us do very well on the ACT.
So I don't know if you know this answer, Megan, but do you have a list in doing the crosswalk? Do you have a list of these things are on the ACT and not in the course, or vice versa? These things are in the core, but not tested.
So I can speak to English language arts for the English reading and writing portion. So much of ELA, they all blend together. So I would say there is not a list of yes and no. The speaking and listening standards clearly can't have that listening. We don't have listening, right? And we don't have that speaking component for it. But still, a lot of the speaking and listening standards are tied to arguments, and that's part of the writing, right? Or just being able to identify claims in original text. So I would even argue that some of what you see in speaking and listening, you're embedded in other standards. But I would say we don't have a definite list, but that I could take that back to the team to say, hey, you know, what's not there. I know science, it's a little trickier because it's more, and Scott could speak to this far better than I can, because I just don't speak science at all. But I know for science, it was more of a challenge to say, are the skills assessed in these different standards that are going to be required of the students. The students have to have these skills in order to perform well on this portion of the ACT. Math, we can speak to that in conversations that they may have had with me. Math wasn't as tricky as science. It probably was more skill-based, but I would say it was a lot easier to align because sophistication. I didn't answer that question that great, but we don't have a definitive list. But that is something I can bring to the team and say, hey, we're wondering about this.
I don't know that it would be helpful to know things that are in the core that aren't on the ACT, because I would expect that there would be, because the core is a lot more comprehensive. It has a lot more depth. It's a lot more about understanding and the kind of skills and knowledge that you can't test on an ACT. So I would be ashamed of a core that perfectly aligned with the ACT.
Yeah.
Quite honestly. So I don't know that part would be helpful. But if there were something that was on the ACT that wasn't part of our core, that seems like something we should know.
Yeah. Yes. But I mean, to play devil's advocate, I almost hesitate in having a document like that, because then would that encourage more teaching directly to the test?
Right.
So,
right.
How do you weigh that out?
Well, I just want to say from the social studies standpoint, which is not on the ACT, but it is. I mean, the reality is that a rising tide lifts all ships. And our standards, the new standards in social studies that are clear demonstrations of proficiency and are so much more cognitively challenging than the old standards, that students and teachers who are focusing on those standards are going to knock the ACT out of the park in terms of comprehension skills and the writing, so the argument crafting. So I hope that as you're walking around as curriculum directors or as principals, that you're seeing standards-based instruction, that people are really clear. If you walk into a classroom, you ought to be able to ask kids, what are you working on? And they ought to be able to articulate that they're doing a standard, not that we're covering World War II, right? It's like there's a big difference between covering World War II and crafting an argument about what leads to global conflicts. Those are the kinds of ways they're going to be successful in the ACT.
I just had a question. Has assessment looked kind of like what Jennifer did with DIBELS, that direct, we can look at a DIBELS score and say, are they going to be successful on RISE? In assessment, is there a way to look at RISE and say, tell our 5th grade teachers, here's the probability of how your kids are going to do on ACT? That would be so helpful.
Actually, the Utah Aspire Plus assessment is.
That's great. That's good.
So we'll have a predictable score. And Rebecca Peterson is actually also our Utah Aspire Plus test administration specialist. So she could give you on how those scores will be delivered and what does that mean. So the Utah Aspire Plus is going to be assessing the Utah state standards as well as ACT.
What would really facilitate this conversation for us is when we get the results back from the test, that the tests break down to these expected skills and standards instead of the global sort of ACT data we've gotten historically. There's a huge gap between the scores we get from ACT. You've got this crosswalk, and I'm afraid teachers aren't going to take the time in some places to figure out what connects the dots. And the more you could do that in the feedback from the results, the test scores, the easier it would be for teachers or schools or districts to zero in on standards and or skills aren't where we want to be. That would facilitate a discussion through all the grades, not just in a specific grade. If you're looking at punctuation in English or tenses, you could have a broader discussion if the results show that that was a weakness. Just some global English scores down.
A global composite. Yeah, and that has been not having that really drilled down reporting categories within. That has been a complaint. I will take that back as feedback for Rebecca. I don't know, since this is a national test what could be done since we don't develop it. But I can certainly share that feedback with Rebecca the same way. And I think it's great that you want those reporting categories, because I agree, it can absolutely inform future instruction. So I'll take that back to Rebecca for sure.
That one from online too. This is from online. If the items reflect learning that occurs primarily before grade 11, seems rather unjust to associate the results with a particular high school when it comes to accountability. Is there consideration for not placing such an emphasis on this when it comes to school?
Legislated, so. Right. But I would just refer back to what Diana said earlier about contact your legislators. So, because the ACT is.
So all those hands were just so that I would.
It is a great comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do I see any other?
There was a hand.
I think they all just wanted me to notice Rick over here. So. Final question?
Yeah, and thank you for having me, and please contact everyone in assessment if you have questions concerns related to any of the assessments. We are in the midst of many assessment changes, so things can get confusing, and we come right to the source. We can dispel any rumor or misconceptions or help clear up anything or just provide support. So yeah, testing windows are about to open. They're coming. So we're here to support you and help you. And thanks for having me today.
Appreciate that. Okay, next on the agenda, we are going to talk about Title 4A, and I'll turn the time over to Jolene Honey.
Yay. Great. So in your packet, you happen to have a full application of Title IV Part A. If you'd like to grab that and check that out. And I am going to plan on doing this. I'm going to kind of do a really quick conversation about Title IV Part A, and then try to have some space for questions and answers that you may have. If your district is currently implementing Title IV-A this past year, you are very aware that it was a competitive grant last year, and the competitive grants were anywhere between $30,000 and $200,000 depending. And this year it has shifted to formula. And how you know whether or not your LEA or your district or charter school qualify is based on Title I funding. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a bit. But just so you know, like if you qualify for Title I funding, then you qualify for Title IV Part A. And so we'll get right into this. And so it's shifted to formula, and it's based on that formula. So this is part of the Every Student Succeeds Act that became law in December of 2015. Prior to that, Title IV-A did not exist as it does now. The focus of Title IV-A is to talk about how we can support our work in our district or charter school. And I usually do say LEA. I don't know why I'm feeling the need to say all three of those things right now, so I'll just say LEA from here on out. But we focus on well-rounded education. We focus on safe and healthy students. And then also we want to talk about incorporating the effective use of technology. Because we do have a really great, strong digital teaching and learning grant, our conversation is if you wanted to incorporate some funds for the effective use of technology, to please make sure that that is something that is connected to your digital teaching and learning grant. Otherwise, if you are receiving more than $30,000 in funding through Title IV Part A, the conversation is just that there should be some amount or some emphasis of effective use of technology, but actually that it be more minimal. And we'll talk about that in just a minute as well. Which goes to the very bottom bullet, which is our focus is what are the things that we are doing to promote well-rounded education, and also what are the things that we are doing to promote safe and healthy students. The timeline and grant parameters is the grant was actually completed in December. It went online on January 2nd, so it is online now on the Title IV Part A website. I'll show you where that's located in just a bit, but you also happen to have the grant in front of you. It is due on March 1st. And basically, as soon as we have all of the grants and go through everything, we will work on getting award letters out. So it does not have to wait until July 1st of next year to begin using funds. You can start using the funds as soon as you have the award letter, which our goal is to make sure that that all award letters are out by the beginning of May. So please notice that this says it's set up as for Title I. This part is a little bit, it's not tricky, but you have to get used to what this is. Pretty much the funds that you have for Title I, the same formula that is used to determine the number of funds that you receive for Title I is the same formula that is used to determine the amount of funds for Title IV Part A. Because I've had people ask, I want to make it really clear that that does not mean that whatever you get for Title I is what you get for Title IV. It's the same formula, but like a lot less, like significantly less. Like the entire amount of Title IV, we're really excited, has gone from like 2 million to 6 million, but it means that our entire state has 6 million. So so that kind of puts it in perspective of like what's going on in Title I. So just being careful with that. The other thing that's a little bit tricky it's the same formula, but it's a different amount, is this. With Title I funds, you have Title I schools and specific money needs to be allocated to those schools. With Title IV Part A, the funding that you get, I know, is based on Title I, but how you spend your Title IV-A funds in your district is based on the needs assessment, not based on how Title I is spent. So if you're, just because this is an example, if your Title I funds may have a certain school, and I'm not trying to say not to put the funds there, I'm just trying to make sure that we understand that it doesn't have to be the same as Title I. But if you're in your needs assessment, what you're noticing is that you have an issue with, say, for example, you don't have enough girls in your higher level math classes, and you want to be working on that. And that's something that your needs assessment is showing, is that there's some discrepancy with what that looks like, or all of the other things that we can be thinking about, like that exist. You can use your Title IV-A funds for those things, as long as what's important is that you are talking about the evidence-based intervention that you are using to make that happen. I hope that was an okay example. What I'm trying to do is show that it is not, in other words, the conversation that does not have to be specific as to what it was for Title I. The application includes a needs assessment, the research, which is the evidence-based interventions to support your project, work plan, and budget. So those are the 4 main areas. And then the other thing is because we are talking about based on formula, there may be some LEAs that qualify and you're kind of like, okay, we qualify for $20,000 or we qualify. If you wanted to, you could actually create a consortium. So if you wanted to combine with other LEAs or other groups or partners, that is absolutely possible and available for you to do. And then the other thing is to be thinking about how you could use other funds to support and improve things that you are already doing that would be like a complementary service. So the needs assessment for this year, because of some of the different things we're doing, a goal is that this, I'll share with you guys, a goal is that we want it to be that when you have your one needs assessment that you do, especially for like Title I, that you don't have to keep doing needs assessments for all of the different grants and all the different applications that you fill out. So one of the things that I've done this year is if you have already completed a Title I needs assessment with all of the different parts, there are 5 different parts for Title I, you do not have to do an additional needs assessment. You can use that needs assessment. If you are also, like, for example, if you qualify for Title I funds, but for some reason you're kind of like, we just didn't accept them because whatever that looks like, you can still apply for the Title IV-A funds. But even if your amount is less than $30,000, we still need you to have some level of a needs assessment because your needs assessment ties to your goals and your work plan. And I know I want to make sure that we have room for questions at the end, but regarding the needs assessment, does anyone have any questions about that? You can use the same needs assessment as Title I. but you can also have an additional something if you want to, of course. And then if you are receiving less than $30,000, you'll still need some minor needs assessment to be able to connect to your work plan and goals.
I guess my question would be, are there examples of the needs assessment available, or like how comprehensive would that needs assessment need to be for the LEA?
Oh, awesome.
I just worry that it's a short timeline, so I'm just kind of like, what needs to be put in place to make.
Right. So for most LEAs, one of the great things is that you can, if you already have your needs assessment for Title I, you're done. Like there's nothing that needs to be done with that. In the application itself, where the needs assessment conversation is happening, the 5 different areas for Title I are actually all listed out there as well. So if you were someone who was receiving less than $30,000, then you could actually say, you know what, you could focus a needs assessment on 2 of those 5 things, or however that happens to look. Thanks, Robert. And there we go. So the next thing is the evidence-based requirement. This is the same thing as the application as last year. This is the same thing for other ESSA grants, is that you have to kind of show and go through the evidence-based. I want to show you the slide that talks about evidence-based intervention activities, and that when you are filling out the application, don't worry about becoming super verbose about what your evidence-based research happens to be, as much as know that when you are talking about your evidence-based, that you want to be thinking about, do I have strong evidence, moderate evidence, or promising evidence? This PowerPoint will be on the website. And then also there's another document on here that talks about how you can determine whether or not your evidence is at what level that looks like. What is great about it being formula is that this is not comparing one application to another and who wrote something well versus not. What it is it's like, does your application meet the evidence-based criteria? Do you have a strong work plan? It's kind of a yes/no thing. It's like, and you know, as long as you have met the criteria and you have the funding allocated, then you're completely great on that. You can also submit your application early if you wanted to make sure that you were looking at things. I will say this, people who submitted their application last year, the things that we were looking at, those applications all met the level of the evidence-based intervention that we are talking about here. Just, sorry, all of the applications that were awarded last year, I should probably be careful with saying that. This is a graphic actually that someone shared with me that is also on the website, that is the same thing of here's strong evidence, here's moderate evidence, this is what this looks like. And this is, again, this is on the website. In your application, and just because if this is kind of a new thing to you, if you'll go to page 3, which is actually not the 3rd sheet of paper, it's like you have to go to where the pages start. And go to page 3. When we talk about the Title IV Part A being focused on well-rounded and safe and healthy students, these are the areas that we consider to be the priorities. And notice that they're pretty open, but also not completely open. In other words, the well-rounded can be, we know that we really want to increase students' content knowledge in this content area, and then therefore you have basically A2. And you can say this is a priority for us. Or if you have an integrated subject conversation, you can talk about how you have A3. You can have multiple goals, so using multiple priorities. And then you can also go include in your application both things from the well-rounded as well as safe and healthy. I know we have a couple of districts this year who are doing things like, in fact, I'm thinking of Nebo School District, who is implementing the arts and then also connecting that to safe and healthy. Like Murray District is really doing a focus on professional development and focusing on implementing core standards, but also connecting that with their DTL brand and the effective use of technology. You do not have to do that, but I am telling you that some of the districts that I see that are really doing some great implementation are thinking about more than just one goal. And I'm sharing that, and I'm going to say this one more time. It doesn't mean you have to do that. I'm just sharing with you that there are districts who are like, when I'm looking at these things and our needs assessment, which of these areas hit and come together to form one focus in their district, even though it is hitting multiple priorities. Likewise, we talked about the effective use of technology as being another way of implementing and incorporating what you have into your plan. And this is also on page 3. The next thing is I just wanted to show you this page because you'll have your needs assessment, which will be somewhere different. And then right here, you will be talking about your goal and what is the learning gap, or what is the goal that you have related to this. So what is the goal? And then the long-term outcome, how are you going to measure progress toward that goal? And then this is the priority from section 2B. 90% of the applications turned in last year. This was great, but there was one, like if people did not talk about how they connected to their priorities from the prior 2 slides that we just looked at, from here and here, it was really hard to be able to say what was going on. And unfortunately, those applications, because it was competitive, were scored much lower. So I just wanted to just take a moment to make sure that this was one of the areas of, if you were not really being clear, make sure you're clear about how your needs assessment and your goals connect to the priorities. And then we are just to the same place where most grants are, which is how are we making sure that we are supplementing, not supplanting. And so we want to talk about when we are supplementing and not supplanting, allowable examples, allowable expenses, some examples that are here. Unlike other grants, this is a grant where you actually can hire personnel. We have people who have hired personnel for this. I do not, like last year, I was nervous about what may be the future of Title IV Part A. It seems to be a bit stronger now, so I'm not trying to tell you go hire somebody with this grant, but it does seem to be something that is becoming more stabilized, and you can absolutely do that. And then salaries of personnel to carry out programs and services. You can purchase supplemental resources and equipment, and of course those things then need to be tied to what your goals are. And then I will also say this, because this is still going to be true for us, is at most 20% of your budget can be on technology. And of that 20%, at most 20% of that can be on infrastructure, which means that at most 4% can be on infrastructure. So just, and that is in the application, but just putting that out there. And we've already mentioned this too, leveraging resources to support a holistic approach. So I think I was giving the example of how Murray was using the Title IV grant to also then connect with their DTL grants. So if you know of other grants and other things that you think would be a great thing to connect and leverage, that would be wonderful. Please make sure we are not using funds to, and then these are all also in the grant, but it's like, it shouldn't be connected to conference fees. That if you're going to a conference, it shouldn't be connected to travel related to conference fees. Travel is kind of a big thing. Like travel is pretty much a no-no in Title IV Part A. In fact, at the federal level, there's conversations about what about students who are going to a robotics, and even that is kind of iffy. So as much as possible, think about how you would use your own funds for that sort of thing. And I would try to not have travel included in your application at all. And then things that I hope are just kind of like, you might read and think, oh, that's funny. Like we shouldn't be buying cars or cell phones or boom boxes kind of thing. And then also acquiring real property, space, and capital gain expenditures. Something that is new this year that I actually had the idea from a colleague of mine that is in Oklahoma is to give some examples of what some of the evidence-based strategies and what those high leverage strategies happen to look like. So this is the last part of my presentation, is just to kind of share with you that we do have this, and we don't have all of them quite yet, but we are getting close. And I just wanted, here's an example. This happens to be math. This was the first one that was done. And you'll notice that under math, under well-rounded, there's the A1, 2, 3, and 4 that happen to be the different priorities. And so in mathematics, we just wrote down some potential things to be considering. This is not all-inclusive. These are just some things to consider. Like, so for example, when it talks about making sure that you are ensuring student success or on grade level, the multi-tiered system of supports framework in mathematics is out there, plus there's research from NCII and other places. So if you're kind of looking for some resources, this is a place where you can go to find that. Another example happens to be the Safe and Healthy Students. Notice that the Safe and Healthy Students group focused more on priority B, so they have information up here, but plus a little bit of additional stuff. But this is also true. This happens to be health and PE, so health and PE has some information up here. And on the website, you'll notice that there are probably about 7 of them so far. And I'm actually expecting to have a couple of more by the end of this week. In fact, we have a webinar. The first webinar is scheduled on January 15th from 1 to 2. I am going to confess to you, the webinar is not going to be that different than the conversation I'm having with you right now. However, I'd love to see you, and we'll also have some Q&A kind of conversation then. The next webinar after January 15th is January 24th, and it's going to be from 4 to 5 p.m. And all of this information is on the website, even how to join the webinar. So there won't be you have to sign up in advance, and then I'll send you a link. The link is right there, and anyone can join at any point in time that they would like to. Like I said, this will be posted. I don't know if, Jonathan, do you have a place that you post everything for curriculum directors?
So I'll send it out to the list.
Awesome. Okay, because I included a couple of links in here so that if you just wanted to come to the PowerPoint and go to the link. But if you also go to USBE's website and go into the Every Student Succeeds Act location, this is Title IV Part A. And on the Grants tab, so there's an overview. So if you go to the Grants tab, there's the application, the instructions, the examples of the high leverage strategies for evidence-based intervention, excuse me. I know that I just shared like 3 different examples, but I think I also mentioned that there are like 6 or 7 there now. I know that science and language arts is there, and I know that art and science, social studies are coming soon. It includes ideas for priorities under Section A as well as Section B. And then there's also a timeline. The big things for our timeline is that the grant is due on March 1st. As soon as we are able to go through and review and approve the grant submissions that come in, we will get those out, and hopefully we have the award letters by May. The last thing I'm going to say, and then ask for questions. Oh, and by the way, this is also where the webinar information is located. My goal was to have our information out and ready for Title IV Part 8 as soon as possible. As many of you may know, the grants management system that we have in place at the state office this year is new for this year. And so there's been a lot of getting things moved over to that system. And with that being said, the reason I'm sharing that is because Jamie Barrett is the one who is going through and doing the formula for Title IV Part A and needing to do that for fiscal year 19. They just finished everything for fiscal year 18. So as she's telling me that she is working on that this week. So when she has completed that, and I'm gonna say this, if you're like, I'm all over my Title I and I know the exact percent of funding, so therefore I can figure out the percent of funding that I would be getting from Title IV Part A, please go for it. But there will be on this web page, in fact, I think it exists now, it will actually say SSAE formula sheet. And it will be a document that has how much every LEA is qualified for and their expenses. And I'm sorry that like, I wanted to get the application out so you can get started in that conversation. And hopefully, and I will also send emails out as soon as that formula sheet is up there. But the formula sheet, so that every LEA knows what their amount is, just similar to Title I, will be on the website as soon as possible, as soon as it's ready. That was a lot pretty quick because I think you still have one other thing. So I was trying to go through that quickly. Does anyone have questions?
So did I just hear you say that I could go on, at some point, I could go on and look and say, okay, DAGA is eligible for this amount of money would be posted there. Is that what I heard you say?
Absolutely, yes. And I will get an email out as soon as it's posted, so you don't have to keep looking every day to see what that looks like. I'm anticipating, based on my conversation with Jamie, that before the January 15th webinar, which is next week, that it'll be up.
And if I could ask a clarifying question, you said if I'm eligible for Title I, I would be eligible for this. Is there a difference between being eligible and actually receiving Title I funds? So for example, I'm eligible for Title I, but I don't accept the money. I turn it away. So could I still say, I am eligible and I'm going to accept Title IV funds?
Yes, you can. Yes. So if you say, no, thank you, Title I, but yes, I'm interested in Title IV, you do still fill out the application for the Title IV. You do still need to be approved, but absolutely, you do not have to accept Title I to accept Title IV. Any other questions?
So just a clarifying statement, much of what you talked about referred to last year's applications, which were competitive. These are formula based, but they still will be approved at the state level if the bettors find an issue with an application. An LEA would have the opportunity to go back and revise what those concerns are and still get the money.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that, Kathy. This is being recorded, or someone was recording me. What I said earlier is I would prefer, I didn't even say prefer, I'm like, if you'd like to submit your application early, then I can look at that and then let, kind of give you some feedback and let you know on that. But the fact of the matter is if your application had some, I'm gonna put it like this. If there was concern about an application that was submitted, instead of it being competitive or it's like your score may be lower, so therefore the funding doesn't happen for you, what we would do is we would then talk to you about the concerns so that it can be modified, just like you would like with, for example, like with Title I or Title II. And then you could make those fixes. It's great if you are able to get that in sooner. But to be honest with you, the only reason I say that is because if it's something that happens after the March 1st deadline, I would love to still work with you and make sure that gets fixed for you. But I also will say that you may not have your award letter at the same time that everybody else gets their award letter. That would be the difference. So thank you for bringing that up. It also makes me think of one other thing that I didn't put on the PowerPoint, but is in the application. In the application, there's also a letter of intent. And all you do for the letter of intent is literally click on a Google form and put in your name. And when I say your name, it is the purpose of the letter of intent, which is due February 1st, by the way. So when you're looking on the timeline, the letter of intent is just to have the district and the name and email of the person who will be in charge of Title IV Part A. That is it. Like by putting that information in there, that's telling me that you are planning on submitting an application on March 1st. Because if there are districts or locations that, say for example, if someone's like, oh great, my allocation would be $4.27, and I'm a little bit being sarcastic about that. But if that was your allocation and you were like, no, thank you, then I at least know that I can put that back into and being able to reallocate it. And if you have any other questions, like we have the webinar again on January 15th, but also my name and email address is in the application. One of the things that I was also hoping for this year is that everything would be on grants management. And so I am saying this to you. I have changed the application multiple times, going from send it to me via email to grants management, back to sending it to me via email. Will you please, because I hope that I fixed everything. I went through the application multiple times and had other eyes on it as well. But will you please note that the application for this year does come to me via email. And I know it says it on the timeline, but throughout the document, like I said, I've made the changes back and forth because of where I was hoping to go with that. But this year, the application does come to me. By the way, you couldn't put it in grants management even if you tried. So there's that too.
So some of our grants this year, we had to do both grants, you know, Utah grants and a separate thing. So but you're saying just you.
The application will come to me once it's approved and you have that award letter. Then someone, likely yourself if you're the one doing this, will go into the grants management so that the funding part of it on the back end will still be through grants management. So, I don't know why I'm apologizing, but I'm sorry. I was trying to hopefully have everything, but to do that would make it so that we would have to wait longer, and I want people to be able to get the funding as soon as they're ready and able. Okay. You guys are great. I'm so sorry you had to listen to me talk nonstop for like 15 minutes, but you've got my email, or you can see me after.
Thank you.
Okay, the last item on our agenda is social emotional learning, and we're waiting for Holly Todd to come down from upstairs, because we ended up ahead of schedule, by half an hour, and so I guess I should have given you more time to get to know each other at the beginning, and we would have been closer to being on schedule. But while we're waiting for her, let me just there's a couple of things that we're anticipating for February. A couple of the things that we're thinking of having on the agenda is we did present about the elementary literacy framework several months ago, and that's kind of out there now. We're in the process now of developing a secondary literacy framework, and so we wanted to come to you with some of that, get some input on that. We've been so excited about how well the elementary literacy framework has been going, and how we see it as a way to really change some practice in schools and really focus on literacy in ways that we maybe haven't. I'm sure that you are aware that there's some stagnation in some of the literacy scores, and we really want to see some movement there. So we're anticipating that we'll be doing that. We'll also be looking at the legislative update. By February, I think we'll be able to give you a better licensing update, and so we'll be doing that. And then you know, one of the things that comes out every once in a while is this idea of I do, we do, you do, and there is considerable research that shows that that is not always the best way. That there are times when that is appropriate, but there are as many and maybe more times when it's better to do something like you do, we do, I do, or just kind of shake that up in terms of understanding. So we're gonna kind of explore that a little bit with you, because sometimes what we hear from teachers is that they're getting the message that they can only do I do, we do, you do. And so we wanted to talk about that further with you. We might have a chance to talk about English learner accountability. And if there's anything else, and the paraeducator handbook, we will probably be talking about too. That is a pretty full agenda, but if there are other things that you're thinking, in February, I really want to talk about this, please let me know. I want these meetings to always be worth your time. You know, it's always possible to be online, but I know a lot of you take the time to come in, and we want to make sure that it's worth the drive when you're coming from many, many miles. So I'm always open to that kind of feedback. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. And that was just enough of a stall for Holly to get in here. So now I'm going to turn upstairs. I'm going to turn the time over to Holly to talk about social emotional learning, which is something that many of you have been telling me you wanted to hear more about.
All right, sorry that you guys had to stall. Jonathan and I were emailing back and forth, and I stepped away, and he said, "We're ready for you." I am Holly Todd. I am a school counseling program specialist here at the State Board of Education. And prior to coming here, I worked for 17 years as a school counselor in Wasatch School District. And so I was asked to talk to you guys about how you can utilize your school counselors to better support social and emotional learning. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what school counselors are doing and how you can collaborate with them. So I wanted to start with this quote. Choosing between better test scores or social emotional skills is a false choice. Strong relationships are fundamental to happiness and great academic results. We can't separate our academics from our social and emotional, they go together. And when we see those going in together in tandem, we see better results for students. So CASEL, which is Collaboration of Academic and Social Emotional Learning, they have a lot of resources for social emotional learning supports, but this is their definition of school social emotional learning. It is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, and establish and maintain positive relationships and make responsible decisions. So I'm going to ask you guys to do a couple of things. I'm going to give you some questions, and I want you to think about what is your personal answer to those questions. And then I'm going to have you share at your table, and then we're going to share as a whole group. Okay? So the first question, what social emotional skills would you want your coworkers to have? About that for a minute to yourself, and then I'm going to ask you the next question. You have a new person joining your family, a child's getting married, and you have an in-law coming in, or adopting, or a new niece or nephew, or whatever it is. What social emotional skills do you want that individual to bring? And finally, what social emotional skills would you want your students in your district or LEA to have? You share at your table. Share at your table as a small group to start with, and then we'll share as a whole group. Okay? So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes at your table.
You think?
Reality. It is. We made a whole strand for a second.
Because I would have one word for all of them, but in different concepts. What is it?
And then the second, also assertiveness.
I'll give you an example.
There is one.
My sister recently. And like, I'll give you, like, this guy has zero emotional attachment to our family. He comes to our family dinners and he plays on his phone. And he feels isolated, but he doesn't have a connection with anyone because of what he's doing, right? Because he doesn't care to learn about any of us. I was going to. He's very differentiation. So like, I've tried to reach out to him several times and ask him questions.
Be able to absorb.
And it's like the one word and then go back to his phone kind of thing. And you just think, this person gets to understand how other people see things. That's 52. I'm not a kid. Well, I mean, I would say similar things to coworkers, like the biggest thing that most coworkers need is not just see what they need, that's what everybody needs. And students as well. Students can only see from their own perspective.
The second one, where like communication is really broad as a coworker.
Example that I've seen
But
recently.
then when you got to know a person, is the new person joining your family, I think I got really more specific even. So using things like boundaries, which also is helpful.
Come back together in 5, 4, 3,
Precision and
Okay, I want to get some of these ideas written down so we can have them to look back at. Is there anybody willing to share one of the skills from social and emotional learning that you think fit or answered any of these questions?
Empathy.
I'm sitting by myself.
good listener. Yes.
Grit.
I'm gonna put resilience here with it. Is that okay?
Mhm.
If I spelled it right. I know I'm with curriculum, but spelling is not.
It's all right, risk-taking.
Risk-taking. Should I put that one up there?
Yes.
And you know, it doesn't matter how you spell it. It's okay. You can be phonetic if you want.
I have grit. If I spell it and I mess up and I keep going.
Holly, adding on to the listening, it would just be communication in general, because there's
They're besties.
your assertive communication even, and being able to speak on your own personal boundaries and accepting of others, and all that kind of is interactive, I think, really.
Those together.
Mm-hmm.
Confidence.
Any others that we want on here?
Honesty and openness.
And there was a hand over here. We just talked about the ability to like do by yourself and with a group. That you could be a self-starter, but you can also be a collaborator. So I put it as independence and collaboration. Okay. So where do you see these things happening in your school? In your schools? Jody.
The health standards.
The health standards. Perfect. Where else? How does your classrooms, okay? How do you know that health teachers are doing
I
this?
was gonna add one.
Oh, okay.
Playgrounds.
Okay. How do you know?
Some districts do a really good job of the social emotional playgrounds.
We've started having morning meetings and circles, and so we're seeing those types of skills being discussed and brought in.
Perfect. So as curriculum, you have standards and guidelines that help drive what your instruction is, correct? You know that counselors have a comparable standard or guidelines. We call them mindsets and competencies. So and how do counselors go about helping develop these skills? So school counselors, they use their time in different ways. The four main areas are plan for college and career readiness. A lot of you hear of the PCCRs or planning meetings. That's where they're looking at their college and career readiness plans. But they also have these components of collaborative classroom instruction. Teachers and counselors should be working together to implement different standards. One of the ways that we have counselors do that is through our mindsets and competencies. I'm going to ask you to look over the mindsets and competencies and see if any of these things that you guys identified as social emotional learning, show up in the mindsets and competencies for school counselors. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to take that document that Jonathan just passed around and identify where do those fit. Thank you. You can mark this up if you want. You can write on it. I will show you where you can get another copy if you would like it. Yes, there's that link that is on this. We'll take you to the bit.ly link. We'll take you to the models. And then we can go to the end.
On just this.
These are used like only then? All of it.
I'm sleepy when I top it. Where there's a council. And stuff in there. The idea is, so the counselors actually do go and classrooms and teach some of it. You can correct me if I'm overstating. This is nice. This is why we're buds.
Yeah. How they do? Well, not let's just take one more minute to look over those mindsets and competencies.
Self-evaluation.
Right up your alley.
It's actually, I could pick out all colors and everything. I could do a really awesome crosswalk.
I want to. Starting.
You should do the standards out to counselors and have them do the survey before it closes on the 30th for feedback. The draft of the standards, because the public feedback, it closes on January 30th. Yeah. I'll send you like a whole thing that you can just forward out to your group. Because I think that some of the things that are teacher could still meet the standard by having the counselor do it too. Right?
And vice versa.
Yeah. Yes. Like that crosswalk would be amazing.
Yeah. And we have two of them can make it for you.
I love you.
All right, let's come together. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can see I used to be in the schools and I have to do that prompting. Sorry. Did you find these things in the mindsets and competencies? Was there anything on this list that you didn't identify in our mindsets and competencies? Now, does that mean that they only exist in school counseling standards? No. Jody said every single one of these things fits in the health standards. Where else do they fit?
Quite a few of them are in the 7th grade college year.
College and awareness standards, right? And they're reworking some of those standards, and we're collaborating with that as well. So, yeah.
I was really struck by how much social studies is here, you know, in a way that's that I didn't know about.
That you didn't know, right?
I guess the other question to me is just, it's like, how do you, as we continually talk about standards, how do we take standards, a focus on standards that can still reinforce kinds of social emotional learning we want to achieve? And I think that there are, when we have proficiency expectations and standards that ask students to make a case or craft an argument or collaborate or communicate with stakeholders, that you really are getting at a lot of these social emotional skills.
They are not isolated. You can't teach social emotional without teaching content a lot of times, because you need to be able to generalize that social emotional into all settings. Jolie?
Yeah, Holly, I was just gonna say, I would think that all of us can relate to every subject area and what we have going on, because when I think about the STEM policy paper that exists, that talks about what are the things that we are doing for academic and learning development, but also equally the career conversation, the global citizenship conversation, and just social emotional in general. It's like creating a safety in our classrooms that we were talking about in our table, so that you can risk take, so that you can become a citizen. It just all feels like this is a big part of what our job is as educators, is to prepare students for lifelong citizenry and citizenship.
Yeah.
And this is embedded in, I think, what all
They
we all
just
do.
dovetail together.
Following up on that, it seems to me like this is not isolated to any particular subject area. It goes through the whole school. It's very much akin to, it was done a few years ago here with the life skills movement, promoting the life skills. And it seems to me that there was a study a while back that said you don't teach honesty by focusing on the subject of honesty. You have to do it through embedded curriculum or embedded activities and other kinds of things like that. Kids will get bored if you talk to them about honesty. They won't want to do it.
If I put up on today, we're going to learn honesty, it's not going to be as effective as implemented throughout the whole system. Exactly. So when you look at the mindsets and competencies, and then also think about your own curriculum areas that you specialize in, or the content that you are familiar with, it becomes very overwhelming, right? Your core is this big, and how do you actually focus on that? So a tool that we have provided to school counselors is what we call the Curriculum Delivery Survey. And this Curriculum Delivery Survey asks these same mindsets and competencies to see where they're being taught in your school. So Jody's health teachers are going to most likely be marking that each of these are happening because it's part of their health standards. And then your geography is going to be marking it because they're identifying that these are their standards. Math is going to be identifying it because it falls within their standards. And what school counselors do is then take that curriculum delivery survey and fill in the gaps. They need to analyze that data and say, do you know what? Nobody is teaching self-advocacy. That's what I'm going to focus on. Or risk-taking is only taught in a couple of classes. I'm going to make sure that as a lesson for my counseling role, I'm going to go into the classroom and teach that. So counselors are expected to go into the classroom and teach lessons to classes. The power of it is when we integrate it with content. So it's not me just going in and teaching a risk-taking lesson. It's integrating it with the content. So teachers and counselors need to have those conversations. And sometimes those conversations are hard to get. But that's where that collaboration can come in for social emotional learning and working with the teachers in the buildings. We also want to make sure that what we're doing as counselors is aligned to the school goals. So a lot of times school counselors will say, I focus on social emotional. How does that tie back to the reading goal? Or how does that tie back to the graduation goal? How does that tie back to the attendance goal? They really do tie together. If a student feels safe at school, are they more likely to attend? Yes. That environment that you guys talked about at the back table. If we can have our school counselors helping support that environment, then our students are going to be more apt to performing at the level that we want them to. And the other thing is our counselors are not very good at sharing information with their staff. We need our counselors to be promoting what they're doing so that when we have geography for life and there's a stress management portion of geography for life, our counselors are going, hey, let's work together. Stress management is something that I need to be focusing on. You need to be focusing on. Let's make sure we're doing that together. So we need to make sure that we're having those conversations. Now, if you want more information about the mindsets and competencies or the whole school counseling model, this link that I've provided here, I did the bit.ly so it was shorter, can take you to our model. It'll go into all of these things a little bit more in depth. The other thing that school counselors do are data projects, action research. And we really promote a systemic approach to these. So the counselors use their data, they dig down, find where their gaps are, and decide to do a project around that. We ask them to collaborate, and you'll see right here on our document, what do they do for the individual? What do they do with a student group? How do they work with the classroom? How do they work with the grade, school, parents, family, district, and community? It's a systemic approach, and when we're talking about social emotional learning, we have to talk in a systemic approach. It's not in isolation. We need to make sure we're informing the parents of what we're doing. We need to make sure we're informing the community, the district, the schools, the whole child. One of the questions that I was asked is, how do you assess social emotional learning? And it's really challenging. How do you assess somebody's confidence? How do you assess somebody's listening and communication? There are some tools out there that have been provided that you can use, purchase. All of these come from, obviously, companies. Panorama is actually being piloted in 3 districts in Utah. Box Elder, is there anybody from Box Elder here? I think Panorama is being used in Box Elder at some schools. Ogden, is anyone from Ogden here? Okay, I know it's being used in Ogden. I think it's Provo is the 3rd one. They have some assessments for social emotional learning. Graduation Alliance is a company here in Salt Lake. They came out of Salt Lake. They are not in any schools in Utah. And they have an amazing program too that can assess social emotional learning. Base Education is one that I've heard referred to. I'm not familiar with that one. But then Castle has a lot of resources online and different tools for you that way. The last thing I wanted to provide you is an example of social emotional in schools. Self-regulation is a skill that a lot of our kids are missing, whether they're a 5-year-old or a 17-year-old. Being able to regulate those emotions is really a skill that they haven't been taught, and we need to make sure that we're helping them with. So there are some evidence-based programs out there that can help with this. Second Step is an elementary program. Some of our districts, Tooele is using it district-wide. I think Ogden or Weaver is using it district-wide. And it's a curriculum that can help build on each other. You don't have to follow step by step, but the lessons are outlined so that you can help those kids learn those self-regulation skills. The Graduation Alliance that I talked about earlier, they also have a curriculum. Explore is a mindfulness program. Mindfulness helps kids be in the moment. Explore, we were able to provide licenses for 25 schools to pilot it and to try it. Does anybody know if any of your schools are using it? So one of my coworkers was doing an internship at a school that was using it, and so she collected some data. The office referrals decreased, and the academic scores in DIBELS increased. Explore, it's a play and go program. It also gives licenses to parents at home. So it teaches skills to the student at school. They can go home and practice it. It takes 2 minutes of your day. Not very much, but with those type of benefits, you're increasing your academic time. And then Mind Up is another curriculum. It's through Scholastic that is available for mindfulness. Is anybody familiar with calming spaces? Calming rooms? Okay, so a lot of schools are going towards doing some calming spaces or calming rooms. In a classroom, you might have this corner of the room that is set up to be a calming station where students are having a hard time regulating their emotions, can step away from what's going on and get back into control. Iron School District has calming rooms in 3 of their schools at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school. Valley High School, an alternative program, has a calming room in their school. And I went to a school in Granite School District that has a calming room, and I asked them just last week, your students who leave and go to the calming room, is it becoming a problem? Because how many of us are worried about having this calming space and kids taking advantage of it, right? Okay, that's the concern. They said, we have our students, the max they can be in there is 10 minutes. They know that. They come in, they get in control, and they leave. They've had it for 2 years, and not one student has taken advantage of it yet. But what they are seeing is the students' behavior decreases in that 10 minutes, and they're able to go back to classroom and be more functioning and more productive. The calming room has anything from coloring options to a beanbag to sit in, to those little things that you can watch and just the water flows or the sand moves. There's a person who can talk to them if they choose to. They have, and at a school that I went to, they had for December a big fireplace on the screen, and the kids could just go in and watch the fire. And how many of us have been transfixed by watching fire? And the kids know. At an elementary that we went to, Redwood Elementary, their calming room is a full-size classroom, and they have different activities that the kids can just go in and they know and they leave. Of all of the schools that I've talked to that have calming rooms, not one has had a problem with their kids taking advantage of that. It's a social emotional skill to be able to learn to regulate your own emotions. You can't understand somebody else's. You can't have empathy for somebody else's if you don't know your own. So really helping kids understand that. So that's just one example of different programs or different ways to implement social emotional learning. Are there questions that you might have of how a school counselor can support your efforts in social emotional learning?
They have calming spaces where teachers can go for 10 minutes.
You know what? They do actually. The one school that we talked to, they don't have a calming room for the teachers per se, but they have calming time. And it's actually set up before school and after school, because they found some of them didn't want to do it before because it became too anxious about, I got to get ready, I got to have my copies, I got to have all that. So they do it to calming time before and after. So yes, adults need it too. Any other questions? Did that answer the questions that you proposed?
It's you guys who wanted to know more about social emotional. So do you feel like this helped, or do you still have questions about how you can help your students? Or, I mean, Holly's our expert, she's not here all the time, so we want to take advantage of her.
Sure. Just maybe a comment. Wouldn't you agree that if you think of every teacher in your school, no matter what the content is, that is your best teachers? They teach that in their content somehow, probably every lesson.
Well, and I'm going to say that this is at the forefront because they're building relationships with their students, and then the content becomes powerful. If they're missing this, the content is mute to the students. Yeah.
I'm wondering what the connection with homes is. I mean, certainly a lot can be done at school, but when a kid goes home and he's got a disruptive home situation, difficult situations, what efforts are being made to outreach to the homes in this area?
So with school counselors, they do collaborate with the parents. So when you think about that data project template, one of the things was, what are you doing for home and parents? The other thing that we are trying to do with students is if we can teach them skills that they can then generalize them at home. So to be mindful at home, it's not just be mindful at school, it's be mindful at home. So we're helping to try to get those skills to the students and then outreach to the parents. We can't change, just like teachers have all of the reasons why things don't happen for students. Counselors can't change everything, but we're working with resources. We're working to collaborate with agencies outside of the home. We're working with parent groups. There's parent nights. School counselors also provide training for parents. So there's different formats to try to get that support to parents. Because you're right, 6 hours at school doesn't replace 18 hours in dysfunction, right?
I'm just curious what your perception is of those programs that we see in many schools, like Leader in Me or Leader Bucket.
You know, so I think it depends on how they're implemented. If they're implemented systemically, meaning that everybody is part of that program, then I think there's more power to it. If you go in and it's a school counselor's program, it's not going to go well. If you go in, it's the first grade teacher's program, it's not going to go well. If you go in, it's going to be the geography teacher's program, they're not going to go well. I think there needs to be total school buy-in for it to be supportive of students. The programs themselves have power, but it's how they're implemented. Does that make sense? And you have to decide which program is best for your population. I don't think Leader in Me is the perfect answer for all things. Fill Your Bucket isn't the answer for all things. second step isn't the answer for all things. It's what is it that meets your student population? And that you get to decide that.
All right. Thank you very much, Holly, for coming to our meeting today. Okay, no, let's just ask for a 30-second announcement.
Oh, thank you. I'm Melanie Dempsey. I work with DTL. And part of what we're doing with DTL is we host site visits for other schools. So schools who have a DTL program, DTL means technology. Schools who are in the DTL program, they go to different school sites and do visits. We have a school site that is going to host a visit this Friday. And they are planning for 4 times more people that have signed up to come to their site visit. They've got 12 educators who are ready to present what they're doing. And we only have 6 technology people who have signed up to come to this. I would really love to be able to tell this person, we've got you a whole crowd of people to come. The people who like to go to these site visits are not just technology people, but they are all educators. And these particular educators are all elementary school teachers. So if you can think of elementary school teachers who would think that this is a great opportunity to go to another classroom and watch how a teacher is teaching, I would encourage you to invite them. I can send an invitation out to everybody on the curriculum directors list. I just wanted you to have a heads up before I sent it to you, so you kind of knew what I was talking about.
Where's the site?
It's in Granite School District. And they have this huge event planned, and I would just love to give them an audience.
Thank you. And Melanie will hang around after the meeting if you want to get more information from her about that and get her direct contact information. I also want to put in a plug for the equity labs. I have sent out information about that a couple of times, especially in the rural areas. Our numbers are a little bit low. We're really excited about what we have planned. It is a full day of looking at the reason why we would even be talking about equity, which is one of the things that we're really concerned about. Looking at some statewide data and what we're noticing at the state and what that data tells us about effective teachers, who they're teaching, who they're not teaching, and then also some local data. We are pulling data expressly for the LEAs that are signing up so that you can dig in with your team and make a plan about how you can really think about how every student in your districts, your schools has access to high quality teachers. It's really all about access to high quality teachers. And it isn't about moving teachers around, because then you just have somebody else who doesn't have the high quality teacher, right? So it's really about supporting that equitable access to high quality teachers moving forward. So we have extended the deadline to Friday. I have heard that some people have had trouble with Midas. If that's the case, just let me know or let John know. We can just do it by hand. We can help you. We want people to come to those. And also sometimes your HR directors or maybe your equity people, sometimes they're not in Midas. We can help with that too, because I really think it's something that would be great for your HR directors to be a part of. All right, what other questions do you have, concerns, topics that you want to talk about before we disband for today?
One more plug. Next week, on next Tuesday, is the OER Collective. Right now we have 39 people signed up to come, which is going to be a good crowd, but we still have room for more. If any of you are interested in coming to that, that'll be down in the Nebo School District. And it's open to any educator who's interested in open education resources, which basically is free curriculum, essentially. So if you'd like to come and see what's going on with that, we're going to have presentations by 4 other states on their OER collections. So you'll be able to see some resources that are not only here in Utah, but resources that are available to you from other states. I think we have Michigan. Well, I won't remember them all, but anyway, there's 4 good states that are doing some good work that you might want to see what's happening.
Anyone else? Well, thank you for coming today. Thank you to those who joined online today. If you have questions, as always, we are here to serve. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in February.